Welcome to the In-Between, where shift happens. This podcast is for anybody who has ever found themselves in that space in between what was and what's going to be. That space where life happens. The moment between where we are and where we're going. That space that is often uncomfortable to sit in. The stuff of life, the ups, the downs, the moments of connection and insight, and the moments where we can't see two steps in front of us. We will ask all the questions, maybe find some answers, and generally work at being okay in the mystery of the in-between.
And so in today's episode, we're talking about being tired of being tired. I mean, can I get an amen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Amen.
I hear it. I hear the amen. Man, right? Tired of being tired. And that, who knows where this conversation is going to go, because I think it could go in so many directions. So, But so the premise of this, the in-between, that place where we don't always know what's going to happen. The premise of this episode, Dan here doesn't know the questions I'm going to ask. So we're just going to kind of take this conversation the way life shows up. Sometimes when we're not sure what's going to happen next. And so then just being okay with being the in-between, being okay with not always having the answers, or maybe not always being comfortable with the question or the answer. So we're going to jump in. So
Yay.
tired of being tired. I don't know about you, but I just feel tired. And not like a tired, like, oh, I haven't slept enough, which that might also be the case, but like tired, like just tired when you look out in the world and it seems like chaos, and it seems like there's so many things that are working against so many people. And so it's just so tired, and to know like what to do. And for me, I get kind of like paralyzed. Like I get so tired. I see there's so much, I get so overwhelmed. I'm like, I just can't do anything then, because it's just so overwhelming. So why do you think that for so many of us, we feel so tired and then paralyzed by that? I know that's a loaded question, but let's start with it and see where it goes.
Wow. So I'm just going to jump right into my real answer.
It's always helpful.
Yeah. Well, I think a whole lot of people have been able to pretend for a really long time that the things going on in the world don't matter to them. Like it doesn't affect me. It doesn't impact my everyday life. So it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter,
Yeah.
which obviously is not true, but the privilege of so many people to be able to exist as if it doesn't, right? That pretending. Let's just pretend this is a perfect, happy little thing.
My own little world, nothing's happening over here.
I think the number of people that maintain that privilege is shrinking, like a lot. So I think there's a whole lot of people, myself included, where I've been able to kind of shelter myself by that privilege I didn't necessarily even know I had for a really long time. And that privilege, I think, is shrinking and going away for a lot of people. And so it's like looking at the world in a whole new way, you know.
What do you think what do you think the push, or what has been the catalyst? Because I think it's like, it feels like you're saying, like for so long we were, those of us who have privilege, whatever level that is, we're able to kind of compartmentalize our lives against the rest of the world, right?
Yeah.
And I know, 100 years ago, I think we had an easy answer for why we could do that, because all we could see was our own little world. We couldn't see everything else, right?
Yeah.
So, but what do you think recently? Because I think I feel it too. What do you think recently has been this catalyst? Like, oh shit, my stuff impacts other people, and I can't just stay silent. Or there is a cost for silence in some of the stuff we're seeing.
Yeah. Well, I think in some ways a lot of it's intentional. Like I think there are more and more people who were raised in a certain mindset who have just kind of like, I don't know, woken up or like opened their eyes or just have connected to so many more people in so many different places to be like, wait a minute, what is going on? This is not true.
Yeah.
This is not how it actually is, um, or just even seeing the impact of lives privileged enough to ignore what else going on, right? So like it's kind of like I don't know. I remember a very specific day like years ago where somebody made this like Star Wars analogy for me where we're taught to believe that we're like the rebels, but actually we're the empire.
Mm. Yeah.
And it unfortunately made so much sense. Like we think we're out here like I say we, like, you know, the rugged individual American America
Yeah.
state.
America. Yeah.
Yeah. Um we think we're told we're doing all of this good in the world. And I think the unspoken or barely spoken or being shouted loudly from distances perspective has been that we're not the good guys. But again, there's been enough pretending and I don't know, propagandizing or whatever the word is, right? Like I think it's been said enough where there's to some degree like, oh no, we're I don't know, are we doing good things? We're helping, I don't know, like or whatever it is, or
Right.
that this way is the right way, or that the culture we have is better than. I mean, there's definitely like a superiority complex thing at play here. Um, but I think, even if it's just social media and TikTok that's been able to directly connect people to like Ukraine, right? I mean, that was the first war for me. That was the first war that I witnessed and witnessing live time, person to person, like unedited. It's not through the news. It's just people walking with their phones watching like missile strikes and tanks blow up and like small crews of people like come out of the bush, like
Yeah.
launch a bazooka at a tank.
Well,
It's
do
like,
you
holy
think
shit.
well, I mean, do you think that inundation and maybe that's kind of you hit on it a little bit now, this inundation of in very real time, we are seeing the lives of others and, framework systems, those things that are directly, like, negatively and marginalizing folks, and so wanting to be able to do something so that we're so inundated with the thing that we want to change that it becomes exhausting. Like it's exhausting for our brains, it's exhausting for our hearts, especially,
Yeah.
compassion for wanting to change, wanting to help, wanting to make an impact in the world, wanting to do the things. Do you think that this ever increasing, like in real time experience is somehow like impacting our tiredness? Is that like some part of the thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge part of it. Like, how can you care, but then also, like, I mean, I think it just feels like it's so big.
Yeah.
There's so much that needs to happen that feels so much out of my control. How can I care about it and then just be like, I don't what do we do? What do I do? Like what actually can be done about this? Um yeah, so it does. I mean, I do think it can feel like caring too much to the point of
Yeah.
like paralysis in that way of like not being able to do anything. But I think also like it plays out in almost everything. What was the show The Good Place?
Oh yeah, I love
The
it.
episode where they find the guy who made all of the right choices, like the
Yeah.
guy who would have actually made it to heaven or whatever.
Right.
And so they go visit this guy and he's racked up all of these like amazing good people points or whatever they call them, right? He would have beat the system and made it to heaven. He would be the only guy in like, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of years or whatever. The only
Right.
person. Um and they go meet him and he's like this total like spaz, like freaking out about every decision and every like step that he takes. And like somebody stepped on a bug and he had to like hold this like funeral and like do this whole thing.
Yeah.
And part of me was like, I totally get that. Like I could totally be like that.
Yeah, and I think that doesn't that lead to the exhaustion, like,
Yeah.
I think that we have a certain amount of bandwidth for our not only our physical energy, but our mental energy and the things that we,
Yeah.
um right? And so I think that, for me, and I think maybe this is maybe some conversation around this, is like, so we can identify with, like, the paralysis and the tiredness that comes with, like, caring too much or not too much, but you know what I'm saying, like, all the things, trying to do all the things. We see
Yeah.
in the world, there's so many things that need to be done, and we're trying to do all the things, whether it's in our individual life or, like, in our collective, like, sphere of life, and so, how do we begin to go from this, all the things, to, like, "Okay, what's the one thing that I can do today?"
Yeah.
To, like, not just from, like, to be supportive to myself, to be supportive to my family or friends or whatever, or to be the one thing that I can do that actually will have an impact on those around me, and
Yeah.
right? And so, what do you think? I mean, how do we make that transition from
I mean,
this,
can I
like,
get back to you
all
on
the
that?
things to one thing? Okay, well, if you don't have it, well, there's
No,
not there's no right or wrong answer. So, like,
yeah.
how do we begin to
Yeah.
to shift? Like, what are some of
Well, I
the mindset changes we have to do to shift from that
yeah.
view?
I mean, I think there's probably like an infinite number of one things that like we each could have our own
Oh,
very
right,
individualized one thing and it could be a
right.
different thing every day and whatever. But for me, none of those things have mattered when I haven't also recognized first what I believe is actually going on. And I say believe because like my spirituality brings me to a certain place of understanding.
Mhm.
And when I can remember to do that, it helps a lot.
Mhm. Right.
But different from like this is the belief of my religion or whatever.
Like,
Like
these entrenched beliefs that, like,
yeah, like
yeah, yeah,
the perspective that because this is a spiritual perspective, that this is the right one. I have the right answer and whatever. Like
yeah.
I've been feeling that the importance of that more and more recently. That
Mhm.
this is maybe a sidebar
That's
soapbox,
okay.
but
That's okay.
yeah, uh, I
As long as we
think
come back at
yeah,
some
yeah,
point.
yeah, yeah. I think anybody who's talking publicly about their like religious or spiritual beliefs, I think we have to come back to this is my understanding of the world because it makes sense to me, and not that it's actually 100% true because my religion said it or my
Yeah,
spirituality said it or this book said it or whatever. Like I I think somehow we collectively have moved into this like this religion says this and I am this religion and that this is the truth, blah blah blah. And it's like you don't actually know that. You have no idea whether any of
right.
that's true or not. You can believe that it's true,
Yeah,
but you also have to be aware enough, intelligent enough to see that and objectively look at the world and be like, "Oh, I wonder where do my beliefs line up with how the world is actually working?" Yeah.
yeah,
And so I
I
say
mean,
that because I think looking at the world now, like it would be really easy to take a very traditional, like good versus evil perspective on the world
right, right,
and be like, humans are evil, we're all doomed, and see, this book is true, and you're all going to hell, but because I believe this book, I'm gonna go to heaven because this is the truth. And it would be really easy to look at the world and justify that belief
yeah.
based on how we think things are looking. Uh,
I'm reading a book now
however,
called, Holy Envy by Barbara Brown Taylor,
okay,
and, she is a Episcopal priest, but she is an academic, and so she teaches world religions at a small, uh, college in, Georgia, rural college. And it's exactly what you're talking about. She's talking about looking at other faith traditions and being kind of envious of like, I don't have to stand in this entrenched whatever. I can actually have value or take or glean from all sorts of faith traditions and practices and spiritualities, and it can enhance. I don't have to choose. I don't have to be a, all or nothing. It's just, I'm just like a toe in it, but it's beautiful. It's like, oh, yes, we don't have to be like that. And I think some of that leads to some of the tiredness too, because my goodness, we have to like
Yeah.
think about some of the energy that we expend so much in having to be right, or thinking that we have to have all the answers, or thinking that I have to do this thing or this thing is going to fall apart, or I have to show up this way or this is going to fall apart. And I think it's all wrapped up in this like tired of being tired. I think we can be like existentially tired, but then we can also be like, wow, like emotionally tired, spiritually tired,
Spiritually tired. Yes.
right? And it's like I don't like have to like fight against things. I can allow my life and my spirituality and my all the things to have this like fluidity.
Yeah.
And wow, what a like to even say the word fluidity, I feel like a breath of air come in me a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a huge part of why, just to go back to that earlier question, another huge part of why it all feels so exhausting is there seems to be such a push from so many places to like move backwards.
Mm.
And so actually this ties into, so to come end sidebar back to the main
Full
point.
circle. We knew we would get back to
Yeah.
it.
So it's really important for me, I have found personally, to remind myself as regularly as possible what I believe is actually happening from like the 30,000-foot perspective of the
Yeah.
world of life. And that is that life is constantly evolving. And so
Mm.
humans included in life are we are individually and collectively evolving. And so for a very long, I believe, for a very long time, humanity has been resisting a lot of the evolution, a lot of the like thought evolution. I'm not saying like we're trying to like adapt gills and shit. I'm
Right,
saying
right.
like the evolution of our thought and how we behave and how we interact. I think we have worked against that progress, the progression of life. We have worked against that in a lot of ways
Mhm.
by kind of losing this connection, right? We a long time ago we put ourselves up on this hierarchical pedestal of we are above
Yeah.
the life that we are actually a part of, the larger perspective on life that we are actually a part of. And so there has been like gentle reminders to like, hey, maybe you all might want to look at the
Look over
world that you
here.
live
Look over
in, and
here.
yeah, and the nature that you are actually a part of, and the
Yeah.
other animals, and the impact you're having on life, and the impact life is having, the world is having on you, right? And maybe we paid attention to some, maybe some people paid attention, maybe others didn't, whatever, but we kind of kept moving in the same direction, which was maybe not necessarily in alignment with the way that life was progressing and
Yeah.
evolving. And over the course of, I don't know, hundreds of years at this point, I think we have ignored it for so long that those gentle reminders turned into like very clear asks, and then very obviously like shouts for help, and then like smack upside, the backside of your head. And now like the world is screaming out to us like, stop, pay
Yeah.
attention, like it's time to do it differently. So for me it's been very helpful to see the 30,000-foot perspective is what we're seeing in the world is the kickback from us collectively not paying attention or resisting, or specifically and intentionally not adjusting how we're doing things,
Yeah.
stopping the things that don't actually work,
Yeah.
or continuing things that harm people, continuing systems and frameworks that oppress people or are killing people,
Yeah.
continuing with like just crazy wars and genocides that are literally like ending thousands, tens of thousands of lives in such short periods. And
And
I think that it helps me to understand that full perspective, because it's not like it's not this good versus evil thing, right? It
yeah,
is the predictable behavior of the patterns that we've created for ourselves. Like we're choosing this.
yeah.
Like collectively, we've chosen all of this because we're just not listening. And like it gets worse until you stop, right? I mean, it's the same thing like somebody with an illness. Like you can pretend the illness is not there, but it's just going to get worse until you give it the attention that it needs.
Well, and then there's an exhaustion in the pretending. So I
Ah,
think,
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
for me, it's so much easier if I look at my own life to, okay, let's face this thing. Okay, what can we do to move past this? This is uncomfortable. What can we do to move past this?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable in the moment and it takes some effort in the moment. But for me, it's so much more energy giving. And what's energy sucking is everything's okay. While, like, the house is burning down, right? Like, everything's okay, everything's fine, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, to constantly have that delusion that things
Yeah.
aren't fine, right?
Yeah.
And w whether individually or collectively, there are lots of things that aren't fine, and I think that it feels like that's the tipping point a little bit because we have tried, and I think there has been a shift of people saying, "Enough.
Yeah.
Enough. We're no longer satisfied, and we no longer can pretend that things aren't going in a trajectory that is not necessarily supportive of everyone." And
Or
so
even people who are now saying enough, who only realized recently. Like there's nothing wrong with only recently having
yeah,
coming to
yeah,
coming
of
to this
course.
conclusion of like, wait a minute, this is not okay. Like
Well,
it
and I
was
think
okay. It was okay before. For my life was okay before because I didn't recognize it. Now that I recognize it, wait a minute, no. Like so, even if it's just the discomfort enough of
yeah,
like, I think that is the process. That
yeah,
is the from that 30,000 foot view. That is what happens. It has to get so uncomfortable that enough people, because we didn't listen. We're not
right,
in touch with
right.
that collectively. It has to get so uncomfortable that enough people are like, wait a minute, no, enough.
Wait,
Like,
something's wrong here. Yeah. Well,
yeah,
and I think for me,
yeah,
that's been my one thing lately because, we talked about how do we shift from, like, being paralyzed or, like, exhausted from everything, and then how can we begin to then take a deep breath and then begin to, like, move intentionally in ways that are energy giving, and it may look, like, so minuscule and be so impactful, and so for me, lately, it's been reading books, watching documentaries, or listening to podcasts, or watching webinars with people who have very different life experiences than I do, that I may
mm,
have never would never have the opportunity to engage with.
yeah,
And for me, what that's created is a little bit of a shift and creates a little bit space. Okay, I've done that one thing. Now what's the next thing, right? And so that shift then impacts from that point on how I interact with the world. It can't help whether it's consciously or subconsciously. Like something you can't unknow some things, right? And so just
yeah,
by the sheer fact of absorbing and knowing, it now has shifted and changed me. And so
yeah,
then that changes how I interact. Then that changes how interact with someone, and then that person may interact in a totally different way to someone else, and then it's like, wow, that one little thing. I read a book the other day, and it really changed some of my views on life or how I maybe engage in this relationship, and then that one little thing, like, totally shifted, everything, and just tiny shifts. I think that's the thing. I think instead of, this on a dime shift, if we could view it as, like, kind of turning a cruise ship, right? Every little
yeah,
thing is pushing us in this direction, like bite size. And I think for me, when I can chunk it and make it little bite-sized pieces, for me, that's energy giving and
yeah,
it seems manageable.
yeah. I think where I get caught is wanting. feeling like we need to also, like, yes, and also feeling like
Mhm.
we need to make huge shifts immediately on a massive scale. Like,
Yes. And so how do we like
yeah,
how do we walk that line? How do we navigate
well, and I
that
think that
the both
that's
and, I guess?
yeah, and I think that's the I don't know, I'll say interesting for lack of a better word. I think that's the interesting part about these kind of conversations because there are so many people who like have recently started paying attention to this kind of conversation, who have for the first time in their lives started getting tired beyond recognition
Yeah.
for like in new ways, like they're just not even familiar with, like, what is happening, like there's something wrong with me, right?
Right.
uh and so for those new to the conversation, those just entering the conversation, it's like what do we tell those people? And that is the I think, yeah, it is important. Like, you just gotta pause, take a breath,
Drink some
find
water.
something that is energy giving,
Yeah.
whatever. But simultaneously, like, there's been people having this conversation for their entire lives, like for decades,
Yeah.
longer than I've even been alive, let alone have been in, have
Mhm.
recognized. And so it's interesting. Like, I can recognize that feeling of like needing to catch up, but then also
Mhm.
recognize where I am.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also recognizing like our unique role in the world as, community leaders or whatever. Like, hmm, maybe we also need to address this on a scale that's larger than I'm comfortable doing at the moment.
Right. Right.
or that I have answers to or whatever. And because I think it's both. I think, like, because for the longest time in our circles, the answer to everything was, well, like, basically take it inward, like, do your work, do your
I'm
own work.
tired of doing my work. I'm just gonna tell you, I'm
Fuck.
tired of it. I'm tired of that.
Right, exactly. And like, and I see the value in that,
Right.
but not when that's the only answer.
Well, it
That
has to
can't be
be,
the
like,
only answer. Like,
reflective outward.
what a privilege it is for that to be the only answer you've ever needed.
Yeah.
To never have to have ever looked at the impact of your life on the world, or the impact of the systems you are part of on the world, or anything other than like, oh, I'm just going to go do my own work. Great. And I think doing your own work is really important when we pair it with doing all of the other stuff too. Like, how do we collectively take on systems of oppression that are inherent in, like, government governing documents of countries? And
Yeah.
I mean, like, we're talking about like capitalism and rugged individualism. I mean, like, all like these huge, like,
Bootstrap mentality, like,
yeah,
all that.
staple concepts and
Yeah.
theologies that so, millions and millions of people have been brought up in, that are just inherent in everything,
And I think
that we're only
it's
that I'm
exhausting to
only
ha
now seeing the impact of on a
yeah.
global scale, right? Like, oh my
And
god.
that's exhausting, right? I mean, the whole, like,
Yeah.
race of hustling for your worth. I mean,
Yeah.
talk about that being I mean, that's or
Yeah.
exhaustion as a status symbol, right? If I'm not
Right.
working 80 hours and earning 6
Yeah.
figures, then who am I?
Or
Uh,
even the idea of earning a living.
yes, and
Really?
we've talked about
Do
that
we
before too.
believe in the idea that you have to earn your ability to be alive? We do. We absolutely do in this country. We do believe that. We bought into that tenfold, that you have to, right? And so, like, ideas like that are just so common, that need to be uprooted. And
Or
holy cow.
deserving of healthcare, deserving of food, deserving
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
housing. Like, that
Right.
whole mentality is exhausting
Yeah.
because what it just perpetuates this constant it's almost like this destination that you never reach,
Sure. Yeah.
and it's
Well, and
tiring.
that's part of the design, right? I mean, if the goalpost always moves, there's always something to strive for. So if we keep everybody striving, they never actually get there, but they don't give up either, because they know they have to, yeah, well, you got to earn your living. You got to earn your right to food and water and shelter, right? It's like, oh, okay, guess I'm not successful yet. I better keep chasing
Yeah.
success. And then, yeah, I mean, it gets a little
So
crazy, man.
we talked about all the things, as we
Oh,
often do, talk about
yeah.
all the things that we know need to change. So I'd like to kind of like, as we kind of begin to come full circle in the conversation. So what can we do?
Yeah.
If you could say 3 things, because 3 is a good number, right? Like 3 things that we can begin to do right now. And I'm sure there are many things, but just your top 3 things we can begin to do right now to begin to create spaces of rest in the midst of this.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what we're talking about, where we can get our breath, spaces of rest. Like, all is not lost, right? There is infinite potential, and we have the ability to begin to shift that. So, top 3 things.
Yeah. I saw this meme
And
recently
leave us
that,
on a hopeful note, right?
yeah, I saw this meme recently that suggested uh, schedule yourself a day off from work and don't tell anybody.
Mm.
I mean, it was kind of a joke, but
Right, right.
um, I think there are ways of um, I don't know, like that idea that like napping is protesting.
Mm.
Take a nap, protest the grind, right? So I think there are ways that we each have in our own sphere of influence, and they're different at different moments, right? Like there are times where you need to literally just rest, and you deserve to rest. So rest, right? There are times where you need to slow down and read a book. There are other times where you need to slow down, read a book by somebody about somebody who you otherwise would have never interacted with, a
Right.
world you never would have interacted with. Um, so I think like literally just finding time to pause is huge. And pause in the grind culture is a protest.
Yeah.
Right. So protest in ways that you can. Take the time, the moment to just kind of stop the spinning of the gears in our minds, the thoughts, the chaos, the anxiety, the whatever it is, right? I think just having a moment, because isn't that what the system does? Doesn't it get us to keep our gears and our thoughts and our anxieties going
Constantly.
constantly? Yeah. And so just taking a moment to pause and take a breath, or pause and nap, or pause and read can be hugely beneficial. I think also number 2 would be to kind of assess your sphere of influence, because everybody has their own sphere. However, whatever size sphere of influence you have, and just kind of have the conversation, like normalize talking about things that maybe aren't working without it turning
Mm.
into like drama and a bitch session. Like we can
Right,
have constructive conversation about
right.
things that aren't working in our lives, whether it's for connection when we're just saying it, or whether it's to actually try and figure something out. And then within those spheres of influence, we can actually start to do things differently. Like, oh,
Yeah.
maybe we don't want to behave that way here anymore. And so
Yeah.
our circle of friends, we're not going to have such behavior. Like, we're going to decide to kind of act differently.
Mm.
And then
I love
if we
that.
do
I
that,
love that.
if we do that here enough, we can get confident in it enough that we can start to do it in other places. And then that circle ripples out into these, like, because each person in that circle also has other circles,
Right.
usually. Um, and so maybe it's something as small as like we're going to use different language around a certain topic, or maybe it's something like, yeah, we're going to go like collectively buy a plot of land and build tiny homes and have like a whole, like, decide to really do some stuff differently.
Yeah.
Or maybe you're someone who's going to run for office and you're going to, get elected to Congress and like make change on a huge scale, right? I mean, I think everybody has their own sphere of influence. And so I
Mhm.
think this is where the do your work turns into affecting the larger scale. Because if we
It's like do
each,
our work. It's like do our work
yeah,
instead of your work. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And then, I think for the third, if there were a third one, I think it's like, it, it's this collective unlearning
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
competition, right? Like
Mhm.
learning, we all need to learn to like support each other. And so whether it's supporting a message for others that are doing work in the world or starting work in the world, like there are people doing good things on really large scales that need to be supported, right? So I think
Yeah.
there is this like collective support of each other and the work that's being done in recognition of that. I mean, for me, it's in recognition of that big picture, like, oh, right, this is all happening, the bubbling up of all of the stuff that just can easily seem like evil.
Right.
That is the happening, the coming to fruition of decades and lifetimes of not answering the call to our authenticity, to our
Yeah.
collective awareness, right? Like I think there's all of these things we're talking about here add up to an expansive collective awareness, right? Like
Yeah.
if you take the time to rest and listen to your own self, then you know what is looking to happen in your sphere of influence and you do that thing. Then you're feeling more grounded and more confident and more comfortable and capable of like, oh, I can go out and support. And maybe it's marching in a protest. Maybe it's sharing a link to a petition online. Maybe it's donating money, whatever it is. Maybe it is running for Congress. Like then
Mm.
we actually might have the energy to do those things.
Yeah.
But kind of understanding like none of us can do all of it, and there's time to do what's yours,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, and like I say, can't do all the things, but we can do one thing.
Yeah.
And so it's like, what is our one thing? And so, um, yeah, this conversation, it's almost like it's just the tip of the iceberg. It's like this conversation is more a way of life that continually evolves and moves.
Yeah.
And so I think that this conversation will continue to evolve and move as we learn and as we take breaths and as we create more space
Yeah.
to rest and to acknowledge that some of us are tired of being tired, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And that's for right now. It doesn't mean it's forever, and that there are ways that we can do that. So thank you for the conversation. As always, love it.
Yeah.
And knowing that this is just kind of like the beginning of making these shifts that move out into not only our own like little lives, but like the big life. So thanks for being with us. And until next time, we will catch you in the in between.
Nobody really enjoys being in the in-between, but thanks for being here anyway. We may not have found all of the answers, but certainly some, and maybe more importantly, a little shift has happened. Because that is really what it's all about, learning to be curious, authentic, and yes, maybe even a tad bit vulnerable. And the beauty of it all is that we are not alone in the in-between. So until next time, we hope a lot of shift happens.